over the next 2 Saturdays on Weekend Connection. What do you say we take a high-level view of AI, artificial intelligence? Are you ready? Okay. My guest is Ryan Pauly, and he's got a lot to say about it. And so let's just sit back and learn on Weekend Connection. Good afternoon, my friend. I welcome you to Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. I'm talking today with a gentleman by the name of Ryan Pauly, and he has written or has put together, an interesting book. And I heard about this book on another podcast some time ago. It's called Stewarding AI, and we're going to be talking a bit about that. We won't plumb the entire depths, that's for sure, but to just give you a taste. Ryan, welcome to Weekend Connection.
Thank you, Ed. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
I thank you for taking time out to join me. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, and you're an adjunct professor at Biola. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And what do you teach on an adjunct basis?
So I currently teach two classes. So one is an online class answering the question, why does God allow evil? And so the entire 15 weeks looks at different theological and philosophical approaches of making sense of how can we as Christians believe that God is all powerful, all loving, all good, yet allow evil, pain, and suffering in our lives. And so that's one class that I teach. I also teach a class titled Gospel Kingdom Culture. And the purpose of this class is that everyone at Biola has to have a minor in Bible. And so they take the, Introduction to New Testament, Old Testament, hermeneutics, theology 1 and 2. And so this class is designed to kind of bridge the gap of all of that intellectual theological learning and to allow for students when they graduate to be able to do three things. Number one is effectively and clearly present the gospel. Number two, defend the Christian faith. And then number three, think biblically about cultural issues. And so it's how do we take everything and now have real life, real world conversations where they can do what they're created to do, to be ambassadors of Jesus Christ, and kind of condense everything into practical, real world conversations where they help people see that Christianity is true and make sense of the world and present the gospel.
Well, you have presented a great segue to this interview, Ryan, because when I heard you on another podcast not too long ago, talking about AI and really having a well-rounded biblical worldview, so to speak, about it, I thought, my, oh my, I've got to get this guy on Weekend Connection, because really practically everyone has heard of AI, uses AI, and it's just growing by leaps and bounds. And as a society, we can hardly keep up with it. And so tell our BBN listeners about this book. It looks like it's a series of essays. Is that right?
Kind of, yeah. It's a cumulative effort. So Brian Chilton and Deanna Huff are the two editors. And so they kind of came up with this project and wanting to write a book on how do we steward AI well. They reached out to me and some others of, hey, will you contribute chapters for this? And so, a team of us, there ended up being 4 total. Me, Deanna Huff, Brian Chilton, and Eric Hernandez that contributed chapters on different topics. And then Deanna and Brian edited the book together to produce one unified book that helps people think about AI from a wide range of different approaches, as well as different specific aspects of AI or ways in which we use AI today.
So what do you mean specifically by stewarding AI?
Yeah, well, the reality is that really AI, artificial intelligence, is in everything. Everything is now pretty much being powered by AI, and we have chatbots like ChatGPT, or now when you do a Google search, there's always an AI overview before it gives you specific links and resources. Your Alexa in your home uses AI. Netflix uses AI to recommend the next movie that you might like. All social media is powered by AI to recommend what post you should see next. So pretty much AI is in everything. And then the question is for us as Christians who are called in Genesis chapter 1, God created humans to steward this world. How do we actually steward this technology well? Meaning, how do we not just put our head in the sand and act like nothing matters and just adopt the technology without critically thinking about it? But then also, how do we not just say, no, I'm never going to use AI and try to push it away like it's something that we can actually separate ourselves from, rather than saying, this is a real part of our world that is pretty much in everything, powering everything. I can't really get away from it. So now how do I understand it well and understand it philosophically and theologically to where I can do what God has created me to do to steward this world well? So I now use this technology to benefit humanity for human flourishing, rather than this technology actually hurting me and hurting others around us as it shapes us negatively.
So for those of us who are really infants, if you will, just beginning to grapple with all of this regarding AI and stewarding it, as you say, what would you say is the first step or steps to take in a positive direction?
Well, I think, one would be thinking about, okay, what is it, or how is AI even functioning in my life? And what are some of the systems or tools that I'm currently using that are powered by AI? And so one is to recognize, every one of us is going to come into contact with it in a different way. And so it's understanding which ways am I in contact with this new sort of technology. And then from there, I think at the most basic level is to recognize that it's not neutral. That's one of the biggest misconceptions I find among Christians, is the technology itself is neutral, because all that really matters is how I use it. And so if I use this AI for good, then it becomes a good thing. If I use it for bad, it becomes a bad thing. So therefore itself, it's actually just this neutral thing. But what I try to help Christians understand is that technology is not neutral. A very simple example of this would be a shovel. A shovel is a form of technology, and it does matter how you use the shovel. You can use a shovel for something good, like digging a hole and planting trees and flowers. You can also use a shovel for something bad, like hitting someone over the head and then burying them, or something of that nature. And so there is a moral good and bad use of the shovel. But the shovel also changes the world as you are literally moving dirt and shaping reality around you. It also has an effect on you. It builds up calluses as you dig. It gets your blood flowing and exercise and things of that nature. And so the biggest, I think, starting point is to recognize that whether we use a phone for good or bad, or whether we use this sort of digital technology and artificial intelligence for good or bad, the very act of using it shapes us physically, spiritually, emotionally, and relationally. And so sometimes it's just starting with seeing the effect that these technologies have in general go far beyond what we sometimes realize.
Just another example I'm thinking of as you're talking is simply say we have an issue with something and we call customer service, whether it's with our bank or some other company, and we get the recording and we know that it's AI usually, and sometimes, most of the time really, we just want to talk to a human being. And so our world's being shaped because deep down I think most of us want to talk to a human being. It's not that, but you make a good point there that intrinsically, that AI is not neutral, and that's the thing that really hit me over the head, so to speak, when I heard you earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality is that we recognize tools in general are not neutral. The difference between the shovel example I gave you and modern AI is the fact that most tools, like shovels, sit there and wait for you to use them. Right? With our digital technologies, one of the profoundly influential, formative aspects that it has is it is constantly calling out to us, check me, check me, check me. And there's also no one on the other side of a shovel trying to figure out how to get you to dig more holes. They just design a shovel and you buy the shovel. But with a lot of modern technology, the more you use it, the more money the other side makes. And so they actually have intentionally designed features to get you to use it more. There's notifications on the phone that are constantly crying out to you, check me, check me, check me. And that's why the reality is one way that, like phones, for example, and that sort of technology shape us, is that if it's in your pocket and you're trying to have a meal with someone, and that thing is buzzing in your pocket, it's a constant distraction where now you're thinking about what's happening, who's trying to connect with me versus who's right in front of me right now that deserves my attention. And so sometimes we then take our phone out and put it on the table, but now every time that screen lights up, our attention is taken away. And so there definitely is a more profound shaping impact with our modern technologies over some of the older technologies like shovels that have a far greater effect on us.
Well, AI has been a long time in coming, I understand. I mean, over many, many years, right? But it's only been the past few years that it's really come to the fore with the public, right?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Like with all technologies, there's aspects of how it's been developed and how it's been implemented. But I think really we have been exposed to this conversation in a much far greater detail and needed conversation with the entrance of ChatGPT. And that was in the early, 20, I forget exactly when, but 2022, 2021, somewhere around there. And I remember that because I was a teacher in a Christian high school when we were first made aware of. A youth pastor came to me and said, "Have you heard of this thing called ChatGPT?" And I said, "No, what is it?" And he's like, "It's something that all students are using, and it is pretty much writing papers for them. It's thinking for them. It's doing all this kind of stuff. And teachers are mostly unaware of this." And I remember then going to the school I was teaching at saying, "Are you guys aware of this? Because we need to be thinking through this as a faculty on how do we really combat the effects and the uses of ChatGPT in our classroom."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember addressing it with my students, and my students were like, "Oh, wow, you know of that. Okay, now this is starting to change," because they were all using it mostly, without adults being aware.
Well, that's
and
for
so I think now so I should say now with ChatGPT really becoming central, that then has then led to other chatbots like Gemini and Grok and others that are other companies are producing something similar. Now Google search has incorporated an AI feature that you can now chat with and have a back and forth conversation with that wasn't there previously. So I think in the last 5 or so years, it really has become much more prevalent and therefore a much more needed conversation.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, Ryan, because I remember not too long ago talking with a friend of ours here who was attending one of the seminaries in the Charlotte area, and I asked him, I said, this AI thing, what type of policy is the seminary going to come out with regarding, say, for example, term papers? And then, you graduate from seminary and say he becomes a pastor, and he is a pastor, but okay, you're quote unquote on your own now. Are you going to give in to the temptation, so to speak, of letting AI prepare your sermons? And it just, as I began more and more wrapping my head around this stuff, it's like, my goodness, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you talked about your seminary, and how have you all been dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's the reality of when I was a high school teacher, I had a lot of just in-class assignments. Our school had adopted a one-to-one technology policy where we wanted to prepare students for the digital world by everyone getting a laptop and everything being digital. And really, I just found in the high school level, students were just not able to manage that. They didn't have the willpower to resist the temptations of just being online and texting their friends and that sort of thing. And then I think when ChatGPT was released in 2022, and then probably about 2023 is when we really started making some changes. I said, okay, we're going back to physical textbooks. We're going back to, you're going to do physical writing assignments, or the assignment that I'm going to give you is much more opinion-based. And that then is a little bit easier to tell when specifically student responses where we're hitting on stuff that is far greater than what the students probably should have known. where I ask the students to tell me about who they think Jesus is, and they start talking about the hypostatic union of Christ. And I'm like, I don't think you know what that word means. Where did you get that from? And so that was one way that it's dealt with. The same thing with my term papers at Biola is I do much more, like their big paper that I have in my Gospel Kingdom Culture class is a project-based, interview-based paper where they have a real-world conversation with someone and they have to reflect on what they learned from that conversation. And then it is run through an online checking software, which there's always this debate on how good is that software and does it find certain things. And there's this constant, changing of programming that's, can make it less detectable. But we try to just do as much as we can to kind of catch those sort of things and to test knowledge inside of a classroom and have discussion-based thing that you can't have AI thinking for you. There's a recent story that came out of a professor actually hiding a chat GPT prompt in his test. So when students copied and pasted it into AI and then just used that response as their submission, something like 23 out of 20 students failed the test because they didn't see the hidden prompt that he had put. So there's certain things that professors are doing, whether it's just doing stuff in person, on paper, or kind of hiding some prompts and things to try their best to catch cheating. And it's hard because it's, in the older days, you didn't have AI do it, but you could take your homework home and have your parents do your homework or your friend do your homework, and you can turn in something that's not your own work. Mm-hmm. And so there's always ways in which teachers are trying to combat against cheating and plagiarism and trying their best to make sure they're testing the actual student and what they know, knowing that any assignment you give, there's sneaky ways around it to get someone else to do it for you.
Yep. It's just very, very different now than it used to be, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, with this book, Shepherding AI, what are some of the broad strokes that are covered in the book? Well, we'll leave it right there for today and get to some of those broad strokes about artificial intelligence next week with Ryan Pauly on Weekend Connection. Weekend Connection, my friend, is a public affairs program of the Bible Broadcasting Network.